23, what was it, 23% something last year that they returned because there were no hurricanes or no major costly ones. Is that right?
Yeah, the cat bond benchmark was up around 20% last year.
In 2012, Hurricane Sandy drowned New York's subway tunnels in 60 million gallons of salt water, leaving devastation in its wake. But while the city struggled to recover, Wall Street turned the chaos into a gold mine. Profiting from catastrophe bonds tied to future disasters, it's a system built on destruction. Let's explore. Let's begin with a chaotic night in 2011. Hurricane Sandy struck New York City with unprecedented force, causing widespread destruction. The storm flooded South Manhattan, left millions without power, and resulted in over $19 billion in damages. Subway tunnels were inundated with 60 million gallons of salt water, marking the worst disaster in the city's public transportation history. It became a stark reminder of the city's vulnerability to extreme weather. South Manhattan was flooded, power was knocked out, and even Wall Street had to close its doors for 2 days, something that hadn't happened since the aftermath of 9/11. 43 people lost their lives, and the city faced billions of dollars in damage. New York's subway tunnels were submerged, and the repair costs were staggering. Streets that were once bustling with life now looked like rivers, and the city's infrastructure had taken a crippling blow. Emergency funds quickly dried up, exposing the vulnerability of even a global financial hub like New York. The scale of the damage raised an unsettling question. How would the city afford to recover and prepare for the next disaster? It's at moments like this, when cities and systems are on their knees, that an unlikely hero steps in. Not a firefighter or rescue worker, but something called a catastrophe bond. At first glance, it doesn't sound like much of a hero, but behind its technical name is a financial lifeline that allows cities to rebuild and prepare for future disasters. To the outside world, it may seem like magic, a way to turn chaos into capital. But for those who understand how the system works, it's clear that catastrophe bonds are as much about profit as they are about protection. The concept of a catastrophe bond, or cat bond as it's called, may seem complicated, but it's actually quite simple. Imagine this. A city like New York, after experiencing a disaster like Hurricane Sandy, decides it needs protection against future floods. Instead of relying entirely on traditional insurance, the city issues a cat bond. Here's how it works. Investors put up money in exchange for interest payments, much like buying any other bond. But if another disaster hits and meets specific conditions, like floodwaters rising above a certain level, those investors lose their money. That money is then used to help the city recover. If no disaster occurs, the investors get their money back plus the interest. Cities get quick access to emergency funds without draining their budgets, while investors profit from risks that may never materialize. However, the stakes are enormous, and when these disasters strike, entire communities depend on how these bonds are structured. It's a high-stakes game where even a few inches of rising water can mean the difference between financial gain and total loss. At first glance, it seems like a win-win, doesn't it? The city gets disaster protection, and investors get high returns. But let's not jump to conclusions just yet. The story of how cat bonds work and who benefits gets much murkier the deeper you go. Consider this. Why would investors willingly gamble their money on something so unpredictable? It's because of the risk-to-reward ratio. Cat bonds offer some of the highest returns in the financial world. For investors, the promise of these sky-high interest rates is irresistible. Why settle for a few percentage points on traditional bonds when cat bonds can offer double or even triple the returns? But the question that lingers is this: who really bears the cost when these disasters happen? Let's pivot for a moment to the West Coast, where wildfires have become an almost yearly occurrence. In 2020, a series of wildfires swept through the region, leaving destruction in their path. One such fire was the Santa Cruz Lightning Complex fire, which began after a barrage of lightning bolts struck a bone-dry California forest. The fire roared through communities, destroying homes and displacing thousands of people. Residents in places like Bonnie Doon, a small village surrounded by trees, suddenly found themselves at the mercy of nature's fury. Entire neighborhoods were reduced to ash, and the air became thick with smoke, choking out the once pristine landscape. Families fled in panic, often leaving behind everything they owned. But what many of these residents didn't realize is that their fates had already been decided, not by the flames, but by an algorithm. Yes, an algorithm. Before the fires even started, financial models had already calculated the risk of wildfires in Bonnie Doon and deemed the area too risky to insure. For many, this realization was devastating. How do you protect your home when no one is willing to insure it? Some residents took drastic measures, building fire-resistant bunkers or purchasing expensive firefighting equipment. Others simply hoped the flames would spare them. Now, here's where things get interesting. While places like Bonnie Doon are left to fend for themselves, the financial world is busy crunching numbers and trading catastrophe bonds linked to these very risks. On Wall Street, a hedge fund manager might look at a fire like the one in Santa Cruz and see an opportunity. Sophisticated algorithms analyze data points, everything from weather patterns to the density of trees, and calculate the probability of the fire spreading. Investors, armed with this information, decide whether to buy or sell cat bonds. And this is where we meet someone like John Seo, a prominent figure in the cat bond world. SEO's journey into catastrophe finance is personal. Years ago, he faced a different kind of disaster when his first child was born prematurely, racking up $500,000 in medical bills. Frustrated with the limitations of traditional insurance, CEO turned his math skills toward a new frontier: disaster finance. Today, he runs a hedge fund that specializes in cat bonds, helping cities and investors navigate this volatile market. SEO's work is rooted in data, and lots of it. His team uses advanced algorithms to simulate hypothetical disasters, hundreds of billions of scenarios in fact. They analyze the likelihood of a hurricane striking Florida, the damage caused by wildfires in California, or even the possibility of a solar storm disrupting satellite communications. For CEO, it's all about finding patterns in chaos. But here's the kicker. While his algorithms can predict risks with incredible accuracy, they can't account for everything. Human behavior, for example, remains a wild card. People who defy evacuation orders, communities that band together to fight fires, or unexpected changes in how governments respond to crises can all throw off even the most precise models. These unpredictable variables often create gaps between the calculated risks and the real-world outcomes. When the fires hit Bonnie Doon, some chose to stay and fight, despite evacuation orders. They worked together, using bulldozers to build fire breaks and hoses to douse flames. Their actions undoubtedly saved homes, but they also introduced an element of unpredictability into the risk models. How do you account for a community's determination to protect itself? And more importantly, who should benefit from that resilience? The answer isn't straightforward. While cat bonds provide financial protection for cities and investors, they often leave vulnerable communities out of the equation. In Bonnie Doon, for example, residents who lost their homes had to rely on personal savings, crowdfunding, or government aid to rebuild. Meanwhile, financial markets thrived, with cat bonds tied to wildfire risks generating billions in returns for investors. Insurance companies and hedge funds profited from premiums far exceeding the likelihood of disasters, while those on the ground faced years of hardship. This divide highlights how financial innovations can benefit institutions but leave vulnerable communities unprotected. Here, numbers dictate everything. Investors don't see a wildfire or a hurricane, they see a set of probabilities, a potential payout. For them, a catastrophe is just another event to be priced, traded, and profited from. It's a world that's both fascinating and unsettling, a reminder of how deeply money has infiltrated even the most human of experiences. So, where does this leave us? As climate change accelerates, disasters are becoming more frequent and severe. The demand for cat bonds is skyrocketing, with experts estimating the world will need $500 billion in catastrophe bond financing to manage future risks. But this raises a critical question. How do we ensure that these financial tools benefit everyone, not just the wealthy and powerful? The story of catastrophe bonds is ultimately a story about choices made by governments, financial institutions, and individuals. Will we use these tools to protect the most vulnerable, or will we continue to prioritize profits over people? As long as capital continues to roam the world in search of returns, the market for disasters will keep growing. And as it grows, it will reshape how we think about risk, responsibility, and resilience in the face of an uncertain future. If this story changed the way you think about disasters, consider sharing it with others. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more insights into the hidden systems shaping our world. What's your take on catastrophe bonds? Are they a necessary innovation or a dangerous game? Let us know below.